Welcome back to the Finding Purpose podcast. My name is Adam. I am your host. First off, I really want to thank everyone who took the time to listen to my last two episodes. Ryan Fazio dropped on Election Day, one of my favorite people here in the local community in Greenwich, who's just been an avid supporter. And then my friend Devonta Rosario last week, the famed mentalist who I was privileged to work with for the inaugural Willow Gala and plan on working with him in the future, mainly for an event coming up in this April. One other person that I was blessed to work with the Willow Gala that I finally was able to get on my podcast is my friend Dorothy Cascerceri Simone. Dorothy and I had met a while ago when I first started working with the Rodone Foundation, when I saw in her bio that it said she was an infertility advocate. Obviously, that being the issue that was at hand, I reached out to her. But Dorothy does a lot more than that. She is also working for JustLuxe as a travel writer. Formerly, she was an editor for multiple magazines.
In Touch Weekly, Life and Style, People Magazine, National Enquirer even.
There you go. She's graced red carpets both in Hollywood, and she was lucky enough to... we were lucky enough to have her for our blue carpet. Too. Thank you. And she is the host of her very own podcast, That Greenwich Life, which talks about all things Greenwich. But when you really dig into the episodes, it's her really just peeling back the layers on things that she's gone through. And I love how you reference different places in Greenwich. I was just here and I was just here, but you're talking about your journey, not only just bopping through this town, raising kids, raising a family, but how your past has really given you a finer appreciation for the lifestyle that you have now. So I really thought it was I just think it's amazing.
Welcome. Thank you. I love that you totally get what That Greenwich Life is all about, because it is. I always say Greenwich is a character. Yeah. It's definitely a setting, but it's not just about Greenwich. It's about the highs and lows of living in this town, but also living all of our lives. Yeah. We're universally connected in the fact that we're all carrying something hard at any given moment of any given day. There's something that we want to change, right?
Yeah, totally. And what I really appreciate about the way you do the podcast is you humanize the people of Greenwich. And, because I think there are a lot of people outside of this community who are very intimidated by it, who prejudge it, where it's just a bunch of rich country club people.
That's right.
Who only care about themselves. And, that is, I didn't grow up in Greenwich. So, that is how people outside of Greenwich brand it. But you bring that human aspect of, listen, you know what? Yeah, we're blessed. But, we also go through shit too. Mm-hmm. And, and just how you talk about just, dropping your kid off at swimming. Mm-hmm. And what really struck me is the way you talk about motherhood, which I think is beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Adam.
It is because, I don't think that a lot of people approach motherhood the same way that you do. But once again, I'm talking based on observation, but you're very just empathetic and just but also you could sense how connected you are with your children and how much they are for you, which leads me to believe that growing up for you probably had a good maternal role model, or maybe not. No.
Try again.
No,
second
not,
choice. Door number two,
or maybe that's why you approach motherhood in this way to contrast your.
Yes.
So I was it's either one or the other.
Yes. So, thank you. First of all, that is the highest compliment that anybody can ever give me, that you feel the way I approach motherhood is, inspiring and positive and all those things. I am a very different mother now, I think, than I was. I have two kids. Mm-hmm. I have an 8-year-old and I have an 18-month-old, mm-hmm. which is so crazy to say that. That big gap is not there on purpose. Speaking of finding purpose, it is a big gap that existed from, a lot of hardship and a lot of loss and a lot of struggle, which is why I feel like I connected so deeply with the Willow Gala and the Carlos Rodon Foundation, all the great work that you do with them. But I went through hell and I completely shed layers and layers of myself that were hanging around for most of my life that were not serving me. I shed relationships, even relationships with what you would consider key people in your life, because I hit rock bottom. I hit rock bottom, losing a baby at 21 weeks, and then following that, kind of, mystery, going on to IVF and failed IVF cycles and miscarriages and living in this riddle, this horrific, every single 365 days a year riddle, being a lab rat, really, like being poked with so many needles and going through so many rounds of anesthesia and seeing the OR way too many times and nobody really knew why or how or what was going to move things forward. And by some true grace of God and just power of the universe, my daughter Gemma, my rainbow baby, was born. Thank you. Was born. And it was after all the IVF. It was not a result of the IVF, which is so wild. The IVF didn't work for me at all. 5 rounds. It was excruciating and cost a lot of money. Yeah. So, on one hand, we were very grateful to be able to do it, but on the other hand, it's no small climb.
Yeah.
And so I think that having gone through all that I did, I think that I did a lot of work.
Yeah.
I did a lot of soul work. I got into meditation. I did tons of therapy, both cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR therapy for PTSD diagnosis, which I always talk about PTSD because we only think of it in terms of people who come home from Afghanistan. And certainly those people 100% have seen things and have witnessed horrific things. But PTSD is something that is, very rampant in the infertility community, that people don't talk about enough in relation to that because they think that they're not entitled to say, well, I have PTSD. But I was diagnosed with PTSD and I did so much work. And I think through all of that work, I think I really changed my nervous system. I think I went from being very, very dysregulated to now being able to have tools in situations to breathe and to cope. But I think it's made me a different mother. And I think obviously, 18 months later, the novelty is still not worn off. Yeah. That when I look at my daughter, no matter what she's doing, even if I just walked into her room to get her from a nap and she's thrown up all over her crib and the room smells awful and now I have tons of laundry to do and don't even know where to begin, I still have a smile on my face because I can't even believe that she's here. Yeah. And my children they're amazing, amazing people, and I really try to be the mother to them that we all need. Yeah. That we all needed when we were kids and that we all really even sometimes need now.
Yeah. One of your episodes, you were talking about how you walked into this bakery to find out that the owner had passed away and your son was obviously his priority was the honey bun.
Yep.
And
the fun bun. Yep.
You yourself, just that personal awareness, acknowledging the way that you handled that was way different than what you might have handled that before you did all the work you just mentioned. And you're just like, honey, we can't tone it down for a second. Where in the past, prior to doing the DBT and all the work that you had, you probably would have been a little snappy and a little more impulsive on that and how that would have made him feel.
Definitely.
And, I think that's just a token to the work that you've done. But, I do want to jump into something that we started with. It's the way that you parent now is a stark contrast to the way that you were familiar with growing up. Is there any way you could just dive into that a little bit? I know you grew up in Pennsylvania, correct?
Yes, yes, in the suburbs
of Philly. Are you guys Eagles fans?
Yeah. Well, I married a Giants fan, so then I kind of had to, give up my Eagles love because football wasn't such a huge part of my life. I was wearing
Eagle socks at the gala.
Yeah. But yes, I grew up as an Eagles fan. But I think in a lot of the work that I did, I think one thing that just kept coming up for me was the fact that, we're very much shaped by our environment as kids, right? And it's kind of something that everybody knows. And I grew up in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania, which, by the way, is Bradley Cooper's hometown. And I had the pleasure because he is my hall pass. My husband knows that. Like,
There
he
you
is
go.
100% my hall pass. And I had the pleasure of actually walking down Fifth Avenue with him to Washington Square Park. I would say maybe 6 or so blocks when my son was just a baby. And he was just out, like, walking around, and he had an Eagles hat on, an Eagles winter
Repping
hat
Eagles
on.
in the city.
Right. And so, and I heard him talking, and I just knew that it was him. Yeah. So then I, of course, had to go right up to him and say, okay, like, we both went to, like, Immaculate Conception Church. Like, we need to talk. And he was so great. And he didn't propose to me during that walk, which was a real bummer.
Unfortunately.
But I did have a walk and talk with Bradley Cooper, which was a really big highlight. So that being said, I grew up in, like, a small town in Philly, and my parents got divorced when I was really young. And they had an ugly, ugly divorce. And it went on, for decades, if you can believe that. But I think, looking back, and I never want to talk negatively about my parents, because I learned so much about generational trauma. And I learned a lot that, our parents and people that have an influence on us in our early days of our life or throughout our life, they're doing the best they can with the tools that they have. And they're doing the best they can with whatever they went through. And so, I say generational trauma like everybody knows what it is, but, I learned a lot about it during my dark night of the soul, I call it, because that is, like, an actual thing. When I went through all my losses and my fertility journey, I learned a lot about generational trauma and how, we have a tendency to repeat the things that our parents or our caretakers, like, had happened to them. And so it's a large reason why, if you have kids, I know you don't have kids, but, like, if you're listening and you have kids, it's a large reason why a lot of times you want to do everything with your kids the same way that it was done for you.
Yeah.
Good and bad, right? Yeah. Like if it was your tradition at Halloween to take a pillowcase and trick or treat with that and collect your candy that way, you're most likely going to want then for your child to take a pillowcase, right?
Yeah.
So that's on, like, a very kind of simple level. But if you grew up in a household where, your parents were pressuring you to get good grades and you were in screaming fights with your parents most nights over your homework,
I was.
Chances, right. Most of us were, because obviously that's also, like, the way that we grew up. Chances are, then when you have a child, the same thing is going to happen, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is lack of awareness. A lot of it is just subconscious conditioning that we pass on to our kids. And so for me, for my journey, my own journey, unraveling a lot of this conditioning that I received throughout the years and in my childhood, it's also been my goal to unravel that conditioning that I could potentially pass on then to my kids.
What were, like, some of the most notable, I don't want to say habits, but most notable traditions, quote unquote, that you wanted to break from your parents and not carry into not only the way your relationship with your children, but also your marriage?
Well, my marriage is a conversation for a whole other episode, Adam. I always say my husband is my most difficult child.
I love that.
On the marriage front, I don't know if I've really figured it out just yet,
Fair enough.
how to be better in a relationship.
Got it.
I think we've worked through a lot. Going through infertility is such a difficult thing for a marriage and for a partnership. But I will say, like, as a parent, I will say,
you're so funny.
Why?
The marriage is a whole different thing.
It is.
Yeah.
Because, like, that's its own beast. I mean, being a parent for me, that's easy. Being a wife and married to my husband, that's a lot harder.
You're the best.
My poor husband, I always throw him under the bus. But listen, I'm a truth teller. I can't help it. We just celebrated our 11-year wedding anniversary.
Yeah, in Aruba, right?
We were in Antigua.
Antigua.
Close,
okay.
yep.
Sorry.
We were in Antigua. Because I'm a travel writer, so we were able to go on this like amazing
That's
trip.
awesome.
And we stayed at this great resort, by the way, if you're ever wanting to go adults only, like with friends.
That's how I like it.
But yeah, like adults only, no kids around, no screaming babies.
Yeah.
The Veranda in Antigua, and then next door, their sister property, the Hammock Cove. Oh, what an incredible, easy, enjoyable, relaxing getaway.
Love
like
that.
you have to definitely check out those places. So anyway, 11 years we've been married, there's like prisoners with shorter sentences than that, but it's all good. But getting back to your original question about, being a parent and like what kind of things I didn't know. I don't think I knew when I had my son, who's now 8. I don't think I knew which things I didn't want to carry on. Right. But going through all that I did, then I started to figure out like, okay, wait a second. Like I need to talk to my son in a way that is different than maybe the way that I was spoken to. My son, really, I think the main goal, and if you're listening and you have kids, this is something really that you can think about. The main goal, I think, for me was, how can I make sure that my son has a healthier nervous system than I do and that I did? I have a healthier nervous system now at 43 years old than I did probably for the first 40 years of my life.
Yeah.
But it still is not great. And I think as parents, our goal is like, how do we allow our children to be who they are authentically and make sure that they know they don't have to do anything or say anything or act a certain way to make me happy.
Yeah.
I'm always happy with them. My baseline is being happy with them, and I want them to know that.
Yeah.
So I think coming from that place, I think for me, coming from like coming from divorced parents and then like step parents entering the scenario and stepsister and things like that, it's all very confusing.
Was it just
for a
very
child.
loud growing up?
Beyond, so loud, so much chaos, like no peace, no quiet.
You have sisters, brother?
I have half siblings.
Half siblings, okay.
And a half brother. I have half siblings and a stepsister.
So you're the only of
One
your
of
mom,
my
your
two
mom-
parents. Right.
Okay.
Right. Exactly.
And then they started other started families.
Then they got
married,
remarried,
started
and
families.
it's just mass chaos.
Yeah.
And you realize when you hit a time of life that I hit with losing my baby, going through infertility, going through all of this, you realize like, wow, I grew up in a ton of chaos. And that's why I chose a life on television.
Yeah.
That's why I chose a life of needing external validation, needing to be seen and heard.
Well, I think that's such a unique story. Like you're their only child, and then you have all these step siblings, but it's almost like you're surrounded by people. You almost probably still felt a little bit alone.
100%. That is, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
I was surrounded by so many people, and this is not a dig at these people,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
But I always felt alone my whole life. And actually, something positive that I will say about my husband is that when I met him, I kind of thought he was like, this like, Wall Street, like D-bag, like, look at this guy. Like we were introduced.
Like a typical finance bro?
Yeah. Like, like I was not looking for a man in finance, 6'5", whatever, like that whole song. But we met through a mutual friend, but I just kind of thought he was a little bit of a hump. And then I was being auctioned off in a date auction for charity for this organization, the W Girls, and it was all the money went to a women's shelter.
That's awesome.
It was really cool. It was at the Highline Ballroom in New York City, which is a really, really big venue. Like I had done a date auction before at a smaller venue, but this one was at a very, very large venue. And so he showed up after we had gone out on our first date, and I still kind of thought he was a little, wasn't too sure. I just wasn't too sure. But what I did learn about him on our first date was that his parents split when he was young, like 2 years old, and both remarried, and then both had kids. And one married someone that had a son from a prior marriage. So then he ended up with an older stepbrother, like I had an older stepsister, and then 2 half sisters from either side of his parents around the same age, same as me.
That's wild.
And it was it was really kind of comforting.
Yeah.
You know, it was comforting to know that, oh, wait, like there's somebody that has a similar lived experience to me.
Yeah, and who knows how I feel.
And who knows how I feel. And I talked about that actually in our vows at our wedding.
I love that.
That was a moment in time where I felt a little bit less alone in the world. So that was something that definitely, you know, like I think drew me in more with my husband. It was definitely a bait and switch, but no, I'm just kidding. But no, I love my husband. I do. But, I mean, listen, things happen in a podcast.
I thought he said he put on Do Not Disturb.
I thought, yeah, exactly. I thought maybe my husband was calling. Maybe he overheard. But no. So I went off tangent, which I always do. But back to your question, you know, like what are some of the things? So number one, dealing with emotions. So I knew that once I figured this all out, when I figured out how to handle grief. Which if you go to my show, That Greenwich Life, and you listen to episode 15 and 16.
15 and 16, yeah.
15 and 16, I
That's
talk
what
a
I
lot.
listened to. That's
that,
why I was
really?
like, I was working out to it, and I was like, it was very emotional.
It's really emotional.
And like I'm like sitting there with tears in my eyes on like a bench.
Yeah.
You know, just like, it's the weight.
It's emotional. It's emotional, but it's like, I think it is uplifting because I think if you are dealing with grief in any way,
it's powerful.
It's powerful. And I think if you're dealing with grief in any way, or you're trying to navigate a relationship with a person who's dealing with grief and you don't know how to support them, I think that these two conversations really shed a lot of light on that. And so what I learned about grief is that you have to really sit with it. You have to really welcome it in. And I think one of the episode titles was like invited in for a cup of tea, and you have to really welcome it in. And so that made me realize that for a lot of my life, the way that I felt about the chaos and the horrible situation with my parents that I was living in, and it was ugly. It was really ugly. That no one ever really allowed me to feel really upset about it and to cry about it and to be angry about it and yell and do things that probably would be healthy for a child to do.
Yeah.
Nobody really allowed me to do that. And so I was emoting in all other kind of crazy, wild ways.
Like no one was ever like, it's okay to feel this way.
That's right.
And, you know, so you never really got the green light to feel, so you hit it and bottled it up.
Right. And also I think I had to parent at times my parents.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like when you have parents who are out of control and their nervous systems are not quite regulated and secure, then you end up having to be the put together one.
Yep.
And so I think what I learned, and again, like this is no knock on, like if you're listening and you're like nodding your head, like, okay, yes, I felt that way about my parents too, or whatever, about your role in a family system, like it's okay. Like these people are not like they're not intentionally trying to hurt you or do things in the wrong way. They're just doing what they know.
Yeah.
And there's a piece in knowing that.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, with my parents are both first generation. My mom immigrated here from Iran, and my dad, the one of 7, was the only one in his family to move here from India. And
oh, wow.
My mom, her entire family moved here. My dad came here solo. And, you know, one of the things for me is like growing up, you alluded to how it's like a generational thing. You know, just to leave your home and come here by yourself in itself is a scary thing.
Beyond.
You know, what drove you to do that. And, you know, lately I've really just been working on understanding my dad's actual story. You know, my mom was more emotional. My dad is more of like that old school disciplinarian type. At least he was growing up. And we had a very like type of relationship where it was more, it was fear-based. I didn't want to disappoint him. And if I did have disappointing news, I would tell my mom and she would soften the blow.
That's right. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that because a lot of kids growing up have a fear-based relationship with one or both of their parents.
Yeah. And, you know, in that relationship, like now it's crazy because I shared it in my speech, how like with my parents, like, you know, now that I understand what they gone through just to have kids, and, now that I've done work, both in therapy and with coaching and all of this, understanding that, most people do what's best with what they know at the given time.
That's exactly right.
And, I think if you slap that on to like pretty much anyone's lived experience and decisions they make, unless they really are just like evil or they really are, angry, like in like a very clinical bad way, I think most people do have good intentions, especially when it comes to their children and the decisions that they made. I talked about how, growing up like that was very different, but like they grew up. That's how my dad's dad probably was.
That's right.
Yep. And with my mom, like when she immigrated to this country, and I'm going to share a little bit about my mom. Today's her birthday. And
happy birthday.
Yeah. Today's she would be 69 today. And when she immigrated to this country, her father owned a bunch of hospitals in Iran, and they're Jewish. And it was during the period of time during the uprising when the government Jews weren't welcome, and they were trying to take over his businesses, so he had to get out of Dodge. So there was a period of time where my mother didn't know where her father was for it was about a year and a half while he was making his way to Philadelphia eventually and gaining him U.S. citizenship and then bringing the family with him later. She was like 7, 11. You know what I mean? Like that's trauma.
Scary. That is really traumatizing.
That's super traumatizing. So like kind of like really understanding my parents' story and how they parented and what they did. And then understanding the dynamic of their marriage. And, for me, I've been in a relationship for 12 years. And, we're very different people. I'm an extrovert. I obviously, I'm in front of a camera right now. She's more introverted, deep thinker, analytical. And, one of the things is it's like I don't really talk about her that much because not because I don't treasure it, because that's the dynamic of our relationship, and it does emulate a little bit my mom and my dad, but they both, for us, it's kind of like we have our time together, we treasure it, and obviously we have our own story. And, when looking at how I behaved in this relationship and looking at the way my dad behaved in the relationship with my mom, yeah, I did take on some of his bad characteristics along the way. And since I've dove in and, I'm in recovery, so that was a huge part of that is looking inside of who you are. Which
is amazing, by the way.
Appreciate that.
That is no small feat.
Yeah.
And that is something that I hope you feel really, really proud of.
I am. But it's given me so often than not, people, the number one relationship you need to work on is the relationship that you have with yourself.
That's right.
And if you have a God, and that's the thing. I didn't even know what a relationship was with myself until I really looked at myself in the mirror and was able to call myself out on my own shit. And one of that was how I was in this relationship and being like, you know what, maybe you did take Dad's narcissism a little bit. You know what I mean? I'm pointing the finger calling him a narcissist, but maybe I took it a little bit.
Yes.
And acknowledging that, and that's something I got to work on.
That's the healthiest thing, though. That's the healthiest thing, to be able to question yourself and the way that you're behaving in a relationship, whether it's with a significant other or even just, with my kids, right? I want to be, I want them to feel always they're in a safe situation. I always knew from the very beginning with my son, and this is before I went through everything, and the person that I was for my whole life was completely shed, basically. But I knew that I didn't want my son to be in any kind of a fear-based relationship with his parents.
Yeah.
And so, there's been my son has never really, I am very strict.
Yeah.
But I've never actually sent him to his room.
Really?
No. I've never sent him to his room. I did put him in timeout a couple times when he was a toddler, and it was age appropriate when he was, when he was acting out. But he's never really, there've been a couple things, he's getting older now and he's getting into different kinds of trouble. So there's been a couple things where we have had to take the Nintendo Switch away for a couple days or something. But I really shy away from that because, and I'm not one of these new age parents where I'm just don't ever punish them and they'll just figure it out. No. Kids need structure, and they need rules, and they need consequences, 100%. But I also think that kids need guidance.
Yeah.
They don't need to be, they don't need to be shamed in situations. They need to be guided. Like even just, last week, he was all excited about running for student council rep.
Nice.
And he did his poster and he did his speech and he was all pumped about it. And like I do in most situations with anything that he does, what I always say, listen, I have faith in you. Like you worked hard on your poster, you worked hard on your speech. But I want you to know that even though you gave max effort, the outcome is now out of your control.
Yeah.
If your peers vote you in for student council, great. Then that's your path. That is your path. But if your peers don't vote you in, then guess what? That was not your path.
Yeah.
I don't know what the reason is, but I'm sure that it's not your path. So you can only do what you can do, and then you have to let the rest play out how it is. And nobody ever said that to me. Nobody ever talked to me like that.
Yeah.
Like when I grew up, it was more, and this is not a bad thing, by the way, but it's like, it's just different, right? Yeah. Like it was more like, work hard and then get the results. Yeah. Like if you work hard, you'll get all that you can achieve. Like work hard at any cost.
Yeah.
And what I learned through IVF and putting my body through the ringer and being under general anesthesia more times than Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
I learned that it's actually not healthy to just, white knuckle things to the point of breaking.
Yeah.
It's not. And it also doesn't necessarily get you the result that you want.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that like for us, failure was never really talked about. And when failure is always going to be part of the journey. You're always going to face failure. And when you don't talk about it and you fail, it's just like, well, I worked hard, I did this, I checked all the boxes. Why am I not getting the outcome that I want? And when you accept failure as just a lesson, then it's like, okay, what's next? How do I pivot? Where do I get better? A lot of times when failure is not really like internalized as a part of the journey, then it's like you fail, you feel defeated, and you beat yourself up, you feel less than, or you go outward and blame everyone else and you blame the circumstances. Either one's toxic. That's right. Looking inward's great as long as you're not beating yourself and being like, how could I have been better? And like I think that's like the most important part.
It's not one or the other. It's not a binary situation, win or lose. That's not life. That's not any experience in life. And also, I'm going to take this one step further, and I'm going to tell you that I don't even think that I even really use the word fail or failure with my son. I don't even think I really talk about it in that way, because I got to the point, and this can sound very hippy-dippy to some that are listening, but it is where I am. I got to the point, thanks so much to Gabby Bernstein, where like I really, really trust that the universe has my back.
I agree.
I really trust that. Like going through my darkest time of my life, I had this victim mentality. And how could you not, right? Yeah. Because everything that you're doing, you're working so hard, you're doing everything, it's not working. And all you're doing is getting knocked down. And I had this victim mentality, like life is so bad and why me? And I'm so victimized and all these things. And it took me to go through all of that to realize that all of those things were never, ever happening to me. All those things were happening for me. Yep. And everything that people in my life were doing during that time, they were never doing anything to me. They were all doing it for me. Even when it felt like a key person was not supporting me. And then it made me then look back even further back on the timeline of life. And it made me realize that I don't need to villainize people, and I don't need to villainize events, and I don't need to victimize myself. Yeah. And so I don't even talk to my son about like failure. I said to him, how will you feel if you don't get elected and maybe your friend does? And my son, oh my gosh, I wish more adults would have this kind of mentality. My son said, well, I'll be happy for him. I will be sad, which I appreciated that he said I will be sad, because you can't just gloss over things. Like you can't say, oh, I'm going to feel nothing if I don't get elected. Yeah. I will feel sad, but also I think I'll be able to give him some of my ideas and he could take them forward to the school.
Love that.
And then also I won't have to wake up early 2 Wednesdays a month to go to the meeting. And I said, that's a really healthy way of looking at it, because I think we have to find a balance between allowing ourselves to feel something, right? It's not healthy to just sweep it under the rug. Like, I think maybe as a child, I think a lot of what I was feeling, it was just not, it wasn't looked at. It wasn't acknowledged. It wasn't seen. It wasn't heard. Like, that made me then have to be like the strong little girl that had it all put together, and I was so perfect. And look at me, I'm in the voice recital, and now I'm playing volleyball, and I'm the captain of the team, and I have straight A's, and I'm on the dean's list. And it forces a person to perform, right?
Yeah.
So like, I think we have to, I know with me, with my children, like, I want them to be who they are. I don't want them to perform. I want them to do what feels good for them.
Totally. And I get that, because growing up, I was never asked, how do you feel?
That's right.
How do you feel? And, like, had maybe I was in, like, when it was an obvious joyous occasion, how do you feel?
Right.
Happy, but like, there weren't like check-ins, periodic check-ins, once a week sitting down. How do you feel? Or like, let's talk about this. What do you think about this? It wasn't really like that. It was very like, what did you do today? What result was there? And blah, blah, blah. So I think that's one of them. But I love what you said about you're training your son. Not training. It sounds weird to say.
It is, though.
But you're training your son to not attach himself to outcomes.
That's right.
And I think that's super important, because when you're not attached to the outcome, you can accept all of them, And like, he seems like he's got a leg up on a lot of adults who don't have the emotional intelligence to even handle that type of to handle every outcome, and that's so important.
I found myself, I was at a place of life, probably from the outside before we got this horrific news at my 20-week anatomy scan. Probably on the outside, people thought, oh, wow, like, look at her. Like, she's living in Greenwich. She has this adorable son, like, driving a nice car, like, handsome husbands. Like, she is so put together. Like, I know that people probably had that idea of me. And what's crazy is that I was so depressed. I was so depressed on the inside. This is even before I got, like, kicked way down. And I think a lot of that was because I was living life on autopilot. I was living my life, making choices from a very, very subconscious place. And I wasn't doing a lot consciously. My schedule was organized in a way that was way too busy, way too hectic. I was doing things that others really needed me to do. And if I didn't do them, then I would be guilted, and I didn't want to do that. So I was doing a lot of people pleasing. And there's a difference between being a people pleaser and being a kind person to others who is also kind to his or herself.
Well, it sounds like you weren't living in your purpose.
I was not living in my purpose at all. No. And so with my kids, a really big thing, and also with my husband, I always try to like tell him, you have to slow things down and you have to try to make a conscious decision in the moment. Don't just like bulk up the calendar with back to back things.
Yeah.
Like, there has to be a place to land where your nervous system can reset and you can rest for a hot second. And I always tell my son that. Like, my son is a stud swimmer. He is amazing in the water.
Swimmer or diver, or both?
Both.
Okay.
He just started diving, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Which is also crazy because he hit his head on the diving board at camp this summer doing a backflip. And it was a really, really scary situation. And it was really terrifying as a parent. And then he wanted to join the dive team. Okay. So like that tells me.
He didn't attach himself to an outcome.
Right. Like that. And that, right. And that tells me that like, okay, Dorothy, I think you're doing something right because this kid has resilience.
Yeah.
And so he's a stud swimmer. But every fall and even in the summer, because he swims for 2 different teams, when it comes up for the signups, I don't just sign him up. I mean, it also costs like, $3,500. So like, it's Greenwich. I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but Greenwich, it's insane. It's insane what you spend on these kids' activities.
Hey.
So also like, the small town girl from Pennsylvania in me is like, let's just make sure before we run the credit card. No, but I joke. It's not about the money. It's about the intention.
Yeah.
Just because you've swam and you've been on a swim team for the last 3-4 years, just because you got like awards at the sports banquet for most improved diver and spirit award for your team and whatever, just because you love it, let's see right now where you are. Where are you right now? How do you feel right now about it? Do you feel like you're just doing it because you should be doing it because you've always done it? Like, should we just sign up for another season because we think that, our parents expect it of us, our coaches expect it of us? Like, how is it making you feel? Do you still feel life force when you're in that water? Do you still feel like when you get off the bus and you get yourself ready to go to swim, do you feel like I'm so excited to go and do this? Or do you feel like it's a drag?
Yeah.
And so I'm always checking in with him about how, in fact, we actually have done something for so long at night. We always have like snuggle time. And I really I cherish it because how many years am I going to have it?
There's going to come the day.
He's turning 9,
And he's like, Mom.
Like snuggling is over.
Good.
Right. But we have this thing that we do that we used to do it a lot more frequently. And we call it life check. And we lay there in the dark usually, and I go through different things. How do you feel about your school? And he'll say like, great, or like I say, how do you feel about your bus? How do you feel about your, and it just goes through. And I always say, and how do you feel about your mom? And I always want you to tell me if I'm ever doing anything that's making you not feel good about yourself or that's confusing you in some way, I want you to talk to me about it. Like, I can handle it because I couldn't do that when I was
Has
his
he
age.
ever been like, Mom, you talk too much?
Well, you met him.
Yeah, he's great.
Okay. He talks too much
He
too.
talks. He's a little chatty guy too.
So he's never, actually I had him on one of my podcasts and he was hilarious. But so he's never said, Mom, you talk too much. But
I'm just kidding.
No. But believe me, there are lots of things like, Mom, he just had a whole talk with me. Like, Mom, you were just in Antigua with Dad for 3 nights. I'm going down, this will air later, but I went to my 25-year high school reunion back in Philly.
That's awesome.
And I went to an all-girls private Catholic school. So it's like sorority, homecoming. And he's like, Mom, you're no, this is unacceptable, Mom. You're out too much. You're doing too much. And meanwhile, my favorite place to be, he does. My favorite place to be is at home with my kids.
Yeah.
And doing anything with my kids. But yes, he definitely has his criticisms of me. And I hope that he does because I'm not a perfect person. And I don't ever want him to be afraid of saying Mom, you really need to, tone it down, or Mom, you need to stop, being annoying about this particular thing. So I really want my kids to have the freedom to really be them and not to be like what I want them to be or to fit into any kind of a mold. I just want them to be them.
I love that.
Because we all deserve that. And too many of us are not living our authentic self. We're not living our authentic lives, and we're not being our authentic selves.
Well, I think, going back to what you said earlier, living your authentic life and being your authentic self goes back to accepting where things are happening for you and not to you. And also, you said something where proof of that is having gone through everything that I've gone through and coming out on the other side of it. And, for me, that's what I call my 20s.
Right.
Like the fact that I simply survived my 20s, given all the poor decisions I made and all the trouble I got into, and all the, people that I probably shouldn't have been hanging out with, and getting outside of that. That in itself is proof that there is that universe and that is working for you. I kind of want to jump into. There's so many things I want to jump into, and I don't know where to start.
Where to begin?
But I want to talk about just prior to your kids, and you were in the city, and I know you were in the city before you transitioned out to Greenwich.
Yep. I lived in New York City for 13 years. I was a psychopath. I was out every single night. I was stumbling into work. This
is when you're working in entertainment.
This is when I was working in entertainment news. Yeah.
So I kind of want to talk about that because I think my viewers would love to hear that, because that was just the theme of the podcast is finding purpose, and I feel like you've had so many very different chapters.
Yes.
And I kind of want to just like talk about that, because at one point, like, that probably was your purpose. Like you said that you left your family in Jenkinton, and the need to have that attention and be in front of the camera was now in hindsight a direct result of not feeling like you got the attention when you were younger. So once you got the attention, what was that like?
It was like a drug. I mean, it was a drug. External validation, if that's all that you're relying on, it is an unhealthy drug. And that was me in my 20s. I wasn't doing any other drugs. I was out drinking a lot. I was out partying a lot. I was out hanging out with celebrities a lot. I was on all the red carpets. My very first day working in New York City was, I was working at a magazine. I was working at a newspaper in Philly. Then this new startup magazine from TV Guide was launching, like a glossy magazine, like In Touch Weekly, Life and Style. And they recruited me, and I went up. And my very first day, I stood on a red carpet for 4 hours for the ABC upfronts, which that was when all the really popular ABC shows were just coming out, like brand new, like a little show called, maybe you've heard of it, Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, really?
Desperate Housewives. I mean, there were all of, like, Lost. I mean,
okay.
all those shows
time,
that ended up, like, running for, like, 20 seasons or more.
Yeah.
I was there at the very beginning, and I was interviewing Patrick Dempsey, and, Freddie Prinze Jr. had a show, and, like, all those celebrities. I was on that carpet for 4 hours. And that was my life in New York City. I was young. I was single. I wasn't single the whole time, but I was single for a lot of it. I was then in a relationship. Sometimes in the relationship, I thought I was single, but I was out every night at the clubs. I was being wined and dined by tons of publicists, all the new restaurant openings, being whisked away on like fabulous press trips. I mean, I'm still doing fabulous press trips as a travel writer, but whisked away to like fabulous press trips with celebrities down in San Juan, Puerto Rico with Nick Lachey. I mean, just it was a larger than life, and it was amazing. I had a very large expense account, pretty much an unlimited expense account. So I was living in New York City, taking friends out to Pastis, tracking Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen when they, first moved there. Tracking. Yep. I was doing all celebrity news. Yeah. So, I mean, I broke the story when like Lindsay Lohan like first hooked up with Wilmer Valderrama. I had a night with Wilmer Valderrama down the road at one point in the Hamptons. Like, I just had a crazy life.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
So someone, all right, I'll be honest, I don't really follow like paparazzi, and like I don't follow like tabloids.
Yeah.
So for
it's not like it is now. It's not like it was then. Then it was just.
Well, then it was different because it was all print.
It was all print, right?
And it was, maybe Entertainment Tonight and
right.
and E! News. That's when E! was huge.
Yes.
Now it's just like, oh my God, you get an alert.
Right. Everything is right, and it's oversaturated. Like, I came up in celebrity news at the height of really like the whole People Magazine. People Magazine has been around for so long, right?
Yeah,
I don't really remember how long now at this point, but I should, because I'm an alum of People Magazine. But I interned for them down in Washington, D.C. I covered the White House Correspondents' Dinner my senior year of college. I went to George Washington University.
Nice. Which president?
It was
Bush? No.
Now I'm not.
Clinton.
Was it Clinton? It was 2003.
Bush.
Yeah, and so
Bush 2, obviously.
Yeah. And I, interviewed Colin Powell, and Jerry Springer was there as one of the celebrities, and like all sorts of celebrities. And then People Magazine was at this moment of wanting to figure out how can we transition into more of this gossipy coverage, because now there's these new magazines out, In Touch Weekly, Life and Style. And so they brought me on when I was working for a newspaper in Philly. I would go up to New York, and I would go up every other weekend, and I would just be their eyes and ears on the ground at all the clubs, taking my friends out till 4 a.m, ripping shots with Paris Hilton, Zach Braff, like dancing with Justin Timberlake, I mean, I had a whole conversation with Tom Brady one night and didn't even like Kim Kardashian. I just talked about like Kim Kardashian was my friend before she became, Kim Kardashian.
Yeah. That's wild.
She was just Paris's friend. And it was a totally different life.
Yeah. It's so funny because talking to you now, it's like, it's very different.
Yes.
And what were the blessings of that experience, and what were also the ugly sides of that experience? Because I feel like there's two sides.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the ugly first because it's just easier.
Yeah.
It's just the truth. The ugly part of it was that I have always come from a place, I've tried to come from a place of kindness. I'm not perfect. I've done things and I've done things to people, I'm sure of it. But I always try to come from a place of humanity. And I didn't like the fact that I got swept into that whole world because I always saw celebrities as people. And I didn't want to, I didn't want to be like, chasing after them or spying on them and doing things like that. I didn't want that. I was living out of alignment throughout that period of time. Now, I loved entertaining people. I loved telling stories. I always loved doing that. I loved having a cool job. I loved having a really cool life.
And you love being seen.
I loved being seen, of course.
Yeah.
I loved being VIP. I mean, I was VIP, all the nonstop.
Yeah.
That's that was my life. And I loved all of that. And I loved getting a glimpse into, so now I guess I'm saying the good things, right?
Yeah.
So I said one bad thing, but now the good
deep
things.
into that, like you started with external validation is a drug.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what you wanted kind of like going into it because you lacked it. So now, on reflection, like you got the external validation, the experiences of our experiences of a lifetime. But I guess like, what did you eventually left that?
I did. I eventually left it. So, so just to go back, like it did, it did have, because I don't feel like I really answered your question. Like it did have a lot of negatives, which I stated, but it did also really have a lot of positives. Like when Sophia Bush and Chad Michael Murray broke up and like had this like really, headline making divorce. Like, I mean, I'm really dating myself now, but this is back in 2005 or something. But One Tree Hill was a really popular show and people loved it and people loved them. I sat down with her at Henry Bendel at an event and I did this interview with her. And yes, I had to kind of pry into her personal life and what she was going through, but she cried to me and we bonded and like I saw her as a human being, and that was a really big thread. I think actually probably that was why I was so successful doing what I did, because I was always the reporter that people knew was going to be a human, even though it was my job, even when I went to the National Enquirer. Okay. There's nothing human. There was nothing human about the National Enquirer. Okay. People were literally dumpster diving at that place. Ugh. I wasn't. I was hired to do their TV. But then I was able to then go onto the red carpet and interview people like Mariah Carey for the National Enquirer. You think Mariah Carey is going to talk to the National Enquirer? Yeah. But Mariah Carey would talk to me. Yeah. And the publicist who handled her and who handled the event knew where my heart was and where I was coming from.
And I think that's so important to look at people as whether they're a celebrity or anyone, like just as a human being and the human component. And I think that's really, kind of like full circle moment here. Like what drew me to Carlos and Ashley when I started talking to them, working with them, like that early experience. I think that's why they decided to work with me.
Definitely.
Because they're like, all right, like first of all, he's not starstruck. He doesn't really care about baseball.
Right.
And it's kind of like, I think that was refreshing to them.
Yes.
Where it's like my priority wasn't really being in proximity as much as it was just like, hey, like I like these people as human beings.
Yes. I feel the same way about them too. Because I'm not really a baseball fan. I mean, I used to be a Phillies fan for a long time. I just don't really follow sports that much anymore. But I mean, the Yankees obviously always, I was in New York. I do think I'm more of a New Yorker than a Philadelphian these days. I know the Philly folks would hate that, but it's the truth.
We're for the Yankees now.
I know. Well, I always have loved the Yankees because I just feel like they are New York, and I mean, sorry to the Mets. I like the Mets too.
They're still in.
I just had the privilege and the honor of talking with Steve Cohen right here in Greenwich, the owner of the Mets, and his wife, Alex, and I have been messaging back and forth on Instagram. They're fabulous people, and that's an amazing team with a real amazing heart and soul. But like, you know, the Yankees, like I didn't care when you guys asked me to come and do the blue carpet for the Willow Gala. I didn't care about the Yankees part of it. I cared about the cause, and I cared about Ashley, who I had sat down with, and we shared a similar situation, and we saw each other's hearts, you know?
Yeah.
But then when I went and did the event, I wasn't starstruck by the fact that these are like insane athletes, you know, and they like make a lot of money each year and they, you know, look pretty good. I was starstruck by the fact of how supportive they were of coming to an event about infertility and IVF and miscarriage and loss and talking about it openly.
Yeah.
Like that was cool.
Yeah, that
was cool.
was super cool. And I think like your early career kind of sets you up to like be able to just talk to anybody.
Yes, and it was the same in my early career, by the way.
Yeah.
People always say, oh my gosh, like who was your favorite celebrity? And oh my gosh, who was the coolest person to meet? And I always say, like, I've interviewed Brad Pitt, I've interviewed Angelina Jolie, Jennifer Lopez, Mariah Carey. You know who I was the most starstruck by, who I loved meeting the most?
No.
When I met the New Kids on the Block. And you know why? Because now they've had like a resurgence, but when I first met them, when I first met Jordan Knight, they had not come back together and done anything. But for me, that was the point in my career that was the most exciting, because I looked at little me, like little 8-year-old me with their posters on my wall and hoping that I could like grow up and marry them someday, and watching all their music videos and dreaming and dreaming and dreaming of this life.
Bradley Cooper? And
who I was going to be. No, because I met Bradley Cooper like way later and not in a work capacity.
Yeah.
And that's what mattered most to me.
That's cool. That's so cool. So when you like transitioned out of that.
So I transitioned out of it mainly because from a business perspective, like, yes, I was always a journalist. I have a journalism degree, but I always have had this business brain. And from a business perspective, once the environment got so oversaturated with websites and blogs and TMZ and all these things, I realized like I'm not going to make the living that I want doing this anymore. Yeah. I need to pivot. I need to think bigger. Yeah. And so this is before Instagram. This is like when people used MySpace, but I saw a need for brands. I saw that brands were starting to hire people like me, and brands were hiring people like me to go on TV shows and to talk about them and to talk about them in a genuine way. You know, like a relatable way. Yeah. And so I started putting together media tours. And so I started my own production company, and I had a publicist at the time, and Robin Stevens, who I credit with so much of my success. She was always in my corner, and she did such an amazing job always for me. And so together, we put together these segments all around the country, and I would go and talk about, you know, like Stella and Dot Jewelry, and you know, they would say like, oh, you know, good morning in Atlanta. We're here in the studio with Dorothy Cascerceri. I was Cascerceri only at the time, and you know, she's here to talk about the top 5 gifts for mom to make her feel like an A-lister for Mother's Day. And you know, Dove was one of my clients, and I would talk about their like new body butter and how good it smells. And Dyson was one of my clients, and you know, nobody wants to give mom a vacuum for Mother's Day, but you know what? Like, this is the vacuum that all the celebrities are using, and this is going to make mom's job 10 times easier, you know, and maybe even dad will vacuum for mom on Mother's Day. And I would talk about things like that.
It's sales.
It's sales.
It's sales. Yep. You know,
well, this is coming from the person who, growing up in my neighborhood, I used to pick my neighbor's flowers and then go home and wrap the bottoms in aluminum foil and then knock on their door and sell them their flowers. And everybody in the neighborhood bought them because they thought that I was cute. Wild. And I had I've always been. Yeah. I mean, I had a neighborhood dog show. I never even had a dog, but I had a neighborhood dog show where everybody had to pay to enter. And I brought a couple cute little, you know, toys from like the grocery store, and made a profit off of the neighborhood and the dog show. So this is always the way my mind worked.
That's so funny. Yeah. That's so funny.
So that's how I then really built, you know, my production company, and I did that up until my son was 1 year old. From the point that my son was born to the point that he was 1 year old, I did like 35 segments that year. I did them mostly via satellite. I wasn't getting on a plane and flying into studios. But I was in the studio up until like a month before my son was even born, doing segments. And that's what I did. And I also had my own TV show. I had my own TV show.
All right. We covered a lot. I want to just talk about purpose, obviously, since that is the name of the podcast. I mean, I could talk to you for hours. And, one of the things that strikes me about you, your purpose is in people and in relationships and in also your own personal journey, having overcome the harrowing infertility story. How do you make sure that you're always living purposely, not just as a mother, but for yourself, like the face mask rule, put your mask on before you can help others.
Yep.
What do you do to keep yourself in that mindset?
That's a great question. I think the succinct answer is balance. Trying to achieve balance. And it's not something that you're going to achieve every day. Some days are different than others. And sometimes there's clusters of days where I feel like I'm giving so much more of myself to work, or I'm giving so much of myself to my kids that there's nothing really left for my husband or for me personally. I think really like slowing things down, slowing down life, and really taking time to just be and not always be doing. I think that's really how I try to stay in my purpose.
Just being intentional with everything that you do.
Being intentional with everything that I do. And sometimes there's things that you have to do, but I practice a lot of boundaries. I practice a lot of saying no. I've lost, quite a few relationships in my life because of boundaries. Lost is probably the wrong word, because boundaries are important.
Yeah.
Healthy
you
boundaries.
Set boundaries, and
people
I wouldn't say you lost them, as it wasn't meant to be.
Right. I gained a deeper understanding of what was really important and who was really important in my life.
Yeah.
So I think living in my purpose, it can only really be attained when I'm really living in some type of balance.
Yeah.
Not perfect.
Are you talking about mental balance? Or are you talking about like task balance? Because for me, I think, my personal opinion, when I try to be balanced, I'm so imbalanced when I'm trying to pursue balance. Because at the end of the day, if I'm watering this part of my life, another part of my life is going to suffer.
That's right.
I need to accept that.
Yep. Yep.
It's more for me about the intention component that you mentioned.
That's what I was just going to say.
So
right.
This is why I'm prioritizing this at this time. I know this is going to suffer, but there will be a time where I will water that. And whether it's a relationship, whether it's still on my list of priorities.
Yes.
Yes. Because I think, for someone like you and someone like me who does have a lot of balls in the air and obviously wants to crush everything, but also has, you're a mother, balance is almost impossible.
Well, I think people confuse balance with perfection. And so balance is not perfect. It's how you live over time. It's more of a marathon than a sprint in terms of like achieving balance. I don't even think it's like, it's not an end result, right?
Yeah.
It's not something at the end. It's just a mindset. Like, to your point, if I'm watering something over here, then this thing in my life is going to be in a drought. It's being okay with that.
Yeah.
And knowing that, you know what, right now, this week, this is the way it's going to be. But it's okay, because I'm going to make some changes and then I'm going to go back to that. Like I love tennis. It's something very Greenwich of me that I started playing. I started playing. I love it. It's like, I play tennis at the country club. Like,
no pickleball?
I don't like it as much because I feel like I can't like really swing.
Okay.
I need to hit that ball. Pickleball is just too like dinky. Like I don't want to be at a ping pong table. I want to be at a big, long tennis court.
Yeah. You're funny.
And so, but I haven't played tennis in the last 2.5 months, which is so unlike me. Like I missed the entire fall season. But it's like, I haven't even worked out. Okay. So like, it's not good. It's really not, but it's okay because right now, like, that's okay. I'm going to come back to it. For right now, like I am neglecting my like being strong and getting my strength back since having my daughter, and I am neglecting my health and my fitness. My pants are a little bit tighter, but it's okay. Like I'm okay with it because I know I'm going to come back to it. So to me, that is balance. Okay. Even though I'm not playing tennis, I know that I'm going to like, I want to be with my daughter more right now because that time is flying.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen you in person and know you to be, like whatever you are focused on, you're giving like 120% to it, and you are intentional with whatever you're doing. And, with the mentality of not attaching yourself to outcomes, it has allowed you to just really just be a powerful human being. And I love that you launched your own podcast and you're sharing that lived experience with so many people. And I'm super grateful to have you here.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here.
I'm going to do one rapid fire question is, what advice would you give to someone who is struggling to find their purpose?
Oh, that's a good question. What advice would I give someone who is struggling to find their purpose? I would say be kind to yourself. That would be my number one piece of advice. Be kind to yourself. And go easy on yourself as you're in that journey and as you're trying to find what you're really meant to be doing or what you really love. Because I think too many of us are focused on the outcome. We're focused on if I just get that job, then I'm going to be happy. That's what I'm meant to be doing. And it's not a destination. It's really a journey. It's an experience.
I love
so
that.
I think be kind to yourself because there's not enough people being kind in this world, unfortunately, right now. Mm-hmm. And we talk to ourselves in a really negative, sometimes mean and hateful way. And I think if we can work on that, we can be kind with ourselves and gentle with ourselves, I think we can accomplish anything.
I love that. And that's so accurate. Please, I'd love for you to tell my audience how they can reach you, what your next projects are. And I'm super grateful to have you.
Thank you so much, Adam, for having me. I love your podcast. I love the title, Finding Purpose. It's just so good because it's really like what we need to be thinking about, right? And it aligns so well with That Greenwich Life. So I'm going to have you on That Greenwich Life. We've had that on our to-do list. It's been so hard. It's like a modern like mom miracle that I was even able to do this today.
I'd be the first guy on your podcast.
I haven't had any men just yet.
Hey, listen.
So there you go. But if people want to check me out, I'm at Dorothy on TV on Instagram, and my website is dorothyOnTV.com. You can find everything about me really on my website. That's like the main hub. And then That Greenwich Life is available wherever you listen to your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Go on, check it out. Shoot me a note.
There you go. Or you can reach out to me and I can connect you with Dorothy. Thank you, Dorothy. I do want to thank the folks over here at Pod Populi who just always do a good job. And this episode will be coming out in November. And I don't even know why I'm saying that because you would have already listened to the entire episode. But at the end of the day, please, I am so grateful for everyone who is listening, who is engaging, and who is sharing this podcast with folks, because that's how we grow this community. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Jackson.